welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alexa Zana and I am your host of the Making Leadership Mindful webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing a really timely topic. We're going to be looking at managing remote teams. And I have with me today a guest expert all the way from the UK who's going to be helping us kind of understand this a little deeper, strategize for this a little deeper, and kind of give us some practical tools that we can actually take away and implement into, being effective in how we are managing our remote and our hybrid teams. For many of us, this transition has been swift. I go as far to say shocking for many of us, and may or may not be welcome. So it's something that we're all recalibrating with right now. Leaders, organizations, I see you, I hear you. It's tough. We're having our employees really reaching, overload and a lot of burnout and things like that we're witnessing right now. And we're really just trying to find our way in how this looks and how this works best for our individual team. So I really hope that we'll be able to shed some light for you today on some practical strategies that you'll be able to take away and implement. So Dermot has operated remotely himself for many years. In various businesses, as well as managing remote teams in Asia, Europe, and the UK. So he really does bring that fantastic lived experience to the session today. Using his experience, Dermot has also now co-founded Manage Remote Teams. So in this company, they help other companies successfully untether from working in the office to a more hybrid model. So working internationally and domestically with clients such as Discovery Ed in the US to small to medium enterprises in the UK and Europe, such as New Philanthropy Capital and Racecourse Media Group, Manage Remote Teams are experts in their field. So using their unique insight, they have developed a business model that brings exceptional value to every person working within their client's business. So Dermot has extensive experience in business spanning consultancy, the luxury industry, e-commerce, and the tech industry, just to name a few. And without further ado, I am going to hand you over to Dermot now, who's going to be taking us through how we can manage remote teams. So Dermot, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. So let me just start sharing my screen. Okay, so hopefully nobody can see my speaker notes, and Alexis is on call to make sure that nobody can, so I shall proceed. I did do this at one stage with somebody, with a group, and unfortunately they were all able to see my speaker notes and didn't tell me till the third slide. My name is Dermot Dennehy. I'm the CEO of Manage Remote Teams. My business partner Melanie and I have been managing remote teams in Europe and Asia and the UK on and off for probably about the last 10 years. And we gave up our London office many, many years ago and successfully and very happily adapted to working remotely ourselves. Now, we train and we upskill remote and hybrid managers and employees across all industries in the UK, in Europe, and in the US. Now, before we start, when it comes to remote and hybrid working, I acknowledge that every market is at a different stage, which is influenced by everything from the work culture within the market, through to the businesses, through to how the pandemic was and is managed by the government. I also recognize that business leaders like yourselves have got many different drivers, and many will want things to go back to normal, i.e. the way that it was. Now, what is different now is that all employees also have different drivers as they decide how they would like to work and how they would like to be managed. The genie is now out of the bottle, and how you manage your teams is changing. Every CEO that we've met in every company that we work with, irrespective of size or location, have the same concerns and the same opportunities. And they recognize that despite what they've learned in the last 18 months about operating remotely, much of that was applied on the fly and, of course, in crisis conditions. And they acknowledge that if they want the best chance for sustainable, long-term remote and hybrid success, there is much to do if they want to get this right. Now, of course, remote working comes in many different guises. Employees can be fully remote, or they can work in a hybrid manner where most of the employees work from some of the time from home and some of the time in the office. And we should also acknowledge that there is, however, a difference between being okay at remote working and being truly accomplished at it in an organization. And there is a huge difference. Being okay is just okay, and being accomplished is the other end, which is where everybody needs to be at. Now, you're all at the top of your game. You run successful businesses, and I'm therefore pretty sure that you would never accept just okay from any part of your business or anybody within your business. The ramifications of being just okay at remote working may not be so tangible, and they may not be so immediate, but they have the potential to be incredibly damaging. Your greatest asset, your people, who were nice and stable before the pandemic, have now been upended, and how they are to be managed has changed. Retention and recruitment are the new battlegrounds in business for 2022, and they need to be at the very top of your radar. Your people, the people who you've worked with for many, many years, will want a line drawn in the sand and the way forward plotted out for them. But within reason, they expect it to be broadly in line with what is happening in the market. Because of course, they're talking to their friends and to their family, right? And those are the conversations that you need to be thinking about as well. And that, of course, is why we're here today. Now, we're seeing January as a natural reset button for those wishing to deliver sustainable remote working for the long term. We've done the last 18 months. Brilliant. We've done really well with that. Now we need to move to the next phase of being brilliant at this. And how you implement your strategy across your organization is, of course, a time and an in-house expertise challenge. And we have created an entire plan that we use across industry for our clients that is insanely affordable and ensures minimum time is required by you. But more on that at the end. So let's run through the agenda. So first of all, the introduction, fairly simple one. Why are we here and what's the opportunity? Then we talk about the 4 pillars. Now, these pillars will form the foundations for successfully implementing remote and hybrid working into your organization. What is abundantly clear to us and to our clients is that it doesn't work if you cherry pick pieces from each of the 4 pillars. Now, that does not mean that you have to implement every detail. Of course, far from it. Every business is different. But what it does mean is that this is a holistic solution and it is very interdependent. So for example, and we haven't covered this yet, obviously, but should you decide to introduce something like flexi-time, it will struggle if you have not created a strategy and an action plan around trust. Now, it's taken nearly 100 years from the introduction of the 9-to-5, Monday to Friday regimented office structure to where we find ourselves as a result of the pandemic. Working life as we know it has been upended. And companies like yours had to steer their people through uncharted waters with very little guidance to a place where remote and hybrid working is normal and is happy. And we all recognize that successful remote working is no longer the exclusive domain of tech companies. It's open to all of us to own it and to excel at it. So today is not just about adapting to a new working paradigm. It's about being a remarkable employer. It's about building a reputation as a company that people want to work for in this new world. So let's start with trust and transparency. Success in remote and hybrid organizations means operating with high levels of trust and transparency. The impact of low trust in teams can manifest as dysfunction in an office situation. In remote and hybrid context, it's far more critical than that. Low trust can undermine entire organizations. So what does that look like? Managers may not entirely trust their teams. Teams may not entirely trust their managers. And team members may not entirely trust each other. Now, I would like to say that I accept that you may have people on your team who underperform despite your best efforts, whether they're remote or not. And not every hire is a perfect fit and may test the most adept leaders. You may have good reason not to trust somebody. So think about what I'm about to say in the context of your managers, your line managers and their teams and the people within teams and the domino effects. In a remote and hybrid context, worst case scenario, a lack of trust can create stress and anxiety, can lead managers to micromanage. We see a lot of that even now. Allow a culture of blame to flourish. People fear showing vulnerability and cannot be honest about how they're coping or progressing with their tasks. People develop a lack of faith in leadership and colleagues. They feel isolated and disconnected from their jobs and their purpose and their colleagues. And people eventually lose motivation to stay with the organization. That's a nice way to say they just leave. And many of these problems can be solved, of course, by building a strong and trusting remote culture. Well, as you know, good leadership is a mixture of taking control and knowing when to let go. And running remote teams certainly tests that principle. So if you trust your people to deliver and they trust you to lead and support them, motivation and productivity will not be such an issue. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. And this is where trust is at the foundations of good leadership. And we talk a lot about bidirectional trust And this means staff consciously trusting their managers trusting their teams, and colleagues trusting each other, and everybody trusting you, senior leadership. Corporate transparency is a real force for stabilization in remote cultures. And transparency is not just about business. It's about being human. People trust people. And that means that people need to see the good and the bad, the failures and the successes, the worries and the triumphs, and the strengths and the vulnerabilities, not just a facade, because frankly, those days are now gone. And this level of transparency needs to permeate throughout the entire organization, every department, every silo, all of the time. And not just from you, but of course, you do need to lead by example. Now, trust is a feeling, and managers need to finally hone their soft skills to build trust. They may need help in addressing their own blockers. They may have unconscious biases that people are generally lazy and cannot manage their own schedules. They need to develop listening skills so they can pick up on problems. And if you've recognized that softer human skills were important before the pandemic, you simply must realize that they're incredibly important if you're planning to work in a hybrid manner. So much so that your managers and employees, if they're not fully trained and 100% proficient, there's a good chance that hybrid working will actually fail. And as a starting point, think about this. How can you build trust if a manager doesn't listen or thinks that they're listening, but they cannot hear? Now, ongoing productivity is undeniably tied to motivation, especially in remote and hybrid contexts when people are physically separate from their team some of the time. Some managers and employees need more support than others to thrive remotely, but for some people, a connected and transparent culture means that they can remain highly productive and motivated. Maintaining relationships in a digital or remote world takes thought and effort about how to stay connected as a human being. And often the spaces in between work are valuable indicators of how happy people are and how they're coping. So actively enabling teams to freely communicate with each other is essential. The working day simply must allow time for people to bond and talk and be human from behind their screens. And if you think that that's normal, that's okay, that's what they do, they don't. Because people are in meetings 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they don't have time to ring me up and just say, hi, would you like to have a coffee? I could really love to have a chat about X or Y. Productivity is not necessarily a linear process or a cold science, as we know. And meeting targets with energy and motivation is underpinned, wait for it, by the human skill of communication. Now, when we're removed from the constant flow of visual and audible cues from other human beings, it's easy to feel the bond in a work group is not as strong as it could be. How do you counter this? You keep communicating and you keep talking. To keep remote and hybrid teams energized, productive, and properly connected, I strongly recommend your entire communication strategy goes under a microscope. So everything needs to be evaluated, from internal email policy to written tone of voice. And when you're reviewing your current strategy, think about this. You mustn't just rely on email, or on the other end of the spectrum, endless Zoom meetings. It's about balance. If you use Microsoft Teams, then make good use of the chat function for quick messaging and create channels for collaborating and socializing in. If you don't use Teams, make good use of WhatsApp or even Slack, which is a perfect app for remote and hybrid working. Now, tech on its own is not a good enough barometer. The data is also telling you a human story about how well people are functioning. Now, this was different because before you could see what was happening in the office all day, right? You don't have sight of people all the time anymore. So don't just rely on data. And here's a flag. Here's a flag. Don't just rely on the numbers. Productivity and motivation go hand in hand. So if there are dips in productivity, you or your managers may need to dive a little deeper into why. It may be very specific. For example, somebody's home situation may have changed again and is now holding them back. And your managers will need to understand that. And when I say change again, I don't mean that they need a new chair. I mean that the partner that they've been living with has that they've fallen out with, and it's very uncomfortable living with that person now. That's a massive change in somebody's life, and your manager needs to have the soft skills to be able to work that out. Another common remote problem is that people burn out because their workload has increased and nobody has noticed. They may be putting in a 10-hour day all by themselves, but they don't mention it for a multitude of reasons. Now, this is extremely dangerous because it gives you a false metric on your levels of productivity. The truth is that good productivity data is carrying an invisible human cost, and that is not sustainable. So let's assume that you reached a point where trust is high and communication is flowing. Let's look at practices that need fine-tuning for healthy remote environments. Well-being when people work from home is a priority, and enabling people to function optimally wherever they're working from is a priority and not a nice to have. And this requires flexible thinking and flexible procedures. So is there room in the day for building relationships, talking about the weather, checking in with each other? Can somebody simply go outside and get some fresh air during the day? Is there flexibility for a parent to down tools when the kids get home from school and make up the work later? Now, implementing flexi time or even core hours can make a huge difference to people's energy levels and to their productivity. Now, in order to manage a remote and hybrid team operating with core hours, managers must set clear deliverables and targets right from the start. The team would need really good guidelines on keeping each other in the loop and effectively collaborating. And the manager would need to create an environment of flexibility, but be really careful not to create one of chaos. Let's talk about the third pillar, which is people and culture. When culture is done well, you'll have teams who are resilient, personally accountable, and connected. And retention and job attractiveness will be high. Every organization has its own unique culture, which is commonly filtered top down from you. Now, you are pivotal to the success of the company's culture, and maintaining your ethos in a remote and hybrid environment is just different from what it was in the office, and it requires considered attention. There are practices that can really unite remote cultures and deliver a true work-life balance for your people. Many are rooted in supporting acts of self-care and creating an environment where that can actually happen. So for example, when we're training managers, we ask them to check that the working day allows people time to eat properly and get some fresh air and just move around, as an example. Eat properly? Isn't that their responsibility? Well, it is, but it's also your responsibility because they're your people, right? And it's up to you to help and make sure that you set the example and you create the environment for that to happen. Because I've seen it where it hasn't happened and it isn't happening. And it's very common. We also encourage an ethos where teams can easily socialize and collaborate, as this is a team builder, not to mention good for mental health. And this must not stop if your organization leans towards hybrid working. We ask people to look at things like happiness, taking breaks, and allowing for different personality types, such as introverts and extroverts and ambiverts, and uniting hybrid teams. Again, human skills are to the fore. Most practices are underpinned by human skills. For example, I'll talk you through flexi time in a second. When you operate with flexi time, you're operating with very high levels of trust. You are reliant on excellent communication skills. You're helping to build a mentally healthy culture. So flexi time does not stand alone as a policy that can be implemented on a spreadsheet. It requires a level of emotional intelligence to operate properly. Flexi time, as you know or may not know, enables people to flex their working hours to fit around other obligations. And in a nutshell, their total daily hours can be moved outside the conventional 9 to 5. Somebody could work to different start and finish times or take a large break in the day to work around childcare and maybe finish later. So flexi time or flexi time and core hours goes a long way to improving most situations and is a massive de-stressor when people have more autonomy over their own lives and their time management. And obviously, flexi time is arranged by agreement. Now, flexi working is becoming less rare these days. Flexible working means the option to work from different places, hybrid working, different hours, or self-rostering, or working in different schedules during term times. There are many, many permutations, and it can seem a little bit overwhelming to operate flexibly, but trust us, it does work. Now, if you're viewing this as a problem, my suggestion to you is just flip it around in your head so you can see the advantages in terms of enhancing productivity, overall happiness, and your staff retention. Now, we all know that when work and leisure are all in the same space, it can be incredibly difficult to switch off, and it's damaging to mental health. Many companies have just sleepwalked into a culture where people expect to be responsive to the demands of their work in their downtime. And this is damaging. It's a damaging habit and it's become very normalized. People must feel comfortable about switching off and unplugging, and your culture should be one that supports and respects people's non-work time. Your culture must ensure people feel okay about not being permanently on call. Otherwise, notifications and emails pinging in during their downtime, they're hard to ignore. So what you do about this, you need to lead a shift where everybody is an active participant in a culture that respects people's non-work time. It's amazingly simple, yet a very powerful move on your part, because you know what it does? It demonstrates trust, it demonstrates respect and care all in one go. Now, you'll have seen these, I'm sure, by now, but we use this notification at the bottom of our internal emails, and we share this with as many organizations as we can. But it's a broader principle that runs through everything that we do. WhatsApp and email subject lines sent out of hours are marked not urgent or open when you're back at work. And why? Because somebody receiving a work-related message on their phone when they're watching TV with their family or socializing, what does it do? It mentally transports you back to work like that. And their downtime has been interrupted and they've been denied valuable recharging time. Now, if you're operating flexi time, this is even more important to have protocols and boundaries in place and embed respect for downtime into your culture. And of course, you need to lead by example. And I have to really stress this point, as I do every time I'm doing this with senior leaders. This is about you, senior leaders. Senior leaders cannot make themselves the exception to this rule. It puts your culture and everybody's mental health in jeopardy. It's a top-down mindset that pays dividends in the long term, because what it actually says is, I respect your right to a work-life balance. Now, we have a choice to be passive or active about implementing a better work-life balance for the people in our organizations. Being passive means doing nothing, burying our heads in the sand, or worse, making a poor attempt to keep up with this changing world. Being an active leader for positive change will benefit your current workers and everybody who you yet to employ. And the effect will be immediate and it'll be long lasting. Let's move on to the final and arguably the most essential pillar for remote working. We know that a mental health pandemic is unfolding. People are not unscathed from events this past 18 months, and employers have a large part to play in alleviating problems and supporting their employees. If your most important asset, one of your employees, is struggling with their mental health, they will not be fully operational in their work, of course, and not in their domestic life either. Poor mental health has the potential to damage lives, the same as poor physical health, only it's much harder to see when people are working remotely, even if it's just for some of the time. Now, this is a UK stat, but I suggest it's probably a worldwide stat. Worst part there is the second part. 31%, 16 to 39-year-olds are showing moderate to severe symptoms of depression. The point here is that it's up from 10.9 pre-pandemic. This is a wake-up call and we cannot ignore it. There are plenty of barriers for companies in identifying mental health problems, especially in remote workers, let alone preventing them escalating or effectively helping anybody who's suffering. The biggest barrier is probably stigmas and unconscious biases around mental health. For example, who would come forward about their mental health if they believed it would jeopardize their career prospects? Nobody. Nobody, nobody, nobody. And mental health absolutely needs to be on the company agenda and must be considered as normal as good health and safety, as an example. And when I say on the agenda, I mean on the actual agenda for your meetings, whether it's your monthly meeting or your weekly meeting with your staff or whatever it may be, it needs to be on there. On a practical level, mental health training for everybody is a logical move. And it helps a great deal towards making everybody feel comfortable about talking about their mental health and listening to others. Now, working remotely means working in a virtual and digital world, and nurturing a culture when checking in on video or verbally with each other is essential. And asking somebody how they are and actually listening to the answer is one of the most powerful tools any human can have for gauging whether somebody's okay or not. Mental health problems can have many different symptoms and signs, and many emotions are part of life's ups and downs, but sometimes they can escalate into more complex psychological conditions. And hybrid working doesn't mean that everybody can relax and stop asking. Just because she'll be in on Friday, she'll be okay. The days that people are at home can be really challenging, and simply checking in with remote workers should always be on your agenda. Healthy protocols around respecting downtime, addressing work overload are powerful actions that demonstrate the worth of each person, regardless of where they work from. When a remote and hybrid culture is lifted into practices that support rather than break people, poor mental health issues can be avoided, but not always. And when things go wrong, when people have life quakes, such as a death in the family or moving house or teenager problems, and they're working from home, you need to go all out to support them. And aside from listening and pointing them towards professional support to prevent a crisis, work with them and leave your door open for conversations. And talk about things. Is their workload overwhelming? Arrange some support. Are their hybrid days hindering or helping them? Ask questions and train your managers to ask questions. That's what you need to be thinking. I'm sure all of you guys will know what to do, but it's about whether your managers know what to do or not. And give your employees the confidence to raise questions and ask and make requests. In a nutshell, I ask you to care. If they trust you, you can have potentially life-changing conversations with somebody in need. Now, as I said earlier, we're in the throes of an escalating mental health crisis across the world, and not surprisingly. Not every mental health problem can be resolved by the company, and there may be times when signposting somebody towards professional help is necessary. And my suggestion to you is to educate everybody, especially managers, on what type of help is available. The things that you can do are rooted in empathy and good practice, and you can certainly bring positive value to somebody in crisis. So let's wrap up the 4 pillars. But before we go, remember what I said at the start? Retention and recruitment are the new battlegrounds in business. Without people, you don't have a business. With a mental health first approach to managing remote and hybrid teams, there's a lot your company can do to sustain and engage in happy and productive workforce. From the trauma of COVID-19, we have an opportunity to totally reshape our working lives. Lockdowns aside, the type of genuine work-life balance was unimaginable before the pandemic. It's now a possibility. In just over 18 months, your employees have gone from pandemic adrenaline to pandemic fatigue to total insecurity about the future of their lives. And nobody is truly okay. And why should they be? As a leader, though, there's an enormous amount you can do to help your teams to adapt for the long term and really nail a fulfilling and remote hybrid future. Changes you influence today can have long-lasting effects. You are a CEO at the genesis of a new working paradigm, and your part in this is important. Do not underestimate how exciting this time could be. Few of you will ever get this opportunity in your careers again to make a truly radical change on the scale you can right now. This really is the moment you can apply fresh thinking around flourishing remotely, underpinned by human skills like trust and empathy, with a mental health front and center. Right, what you've heard today from me is a smidgen. I'm not sure if everybody knows what that means, right? But smidgen being a tiny amount of what it needs to get this right. Tinkering around the edges will most likely result in coming off second best in the new business battlegrounds of retention and recruitment. Creating a strategy and delivering training for senior leaders and line managers and employees, and delivering your vision in a cohesive action plan will ensure success in this new world of work. And of course, there's my plug. That's what we do every day of the week, and we certainly can help. Our live training costs 75 Australian dollars per person for a 2-hour live interactive session. Yeah, just $75. And our plug and play fully customizable package gives you everything you need to implement your strategy in 1 month. And it costs 3,995 Australian dollars. And your time is saved and spared. Alexis will drop you a line with the deck, I'm sure, explaining the package. And if you wish to discuss that or anything else with me, please drop me an email. You can see my email up there, dermot@clickonic.co. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. As always, I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. And now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass you back to Alexis.
Thank you so much, Dermot. I feel like we covered so much ground in that short period, and there's so much fantastic questions and insights coming through the chat as well. So for those who obviously was taking note of what Dermot just mentioned around his offer, I will be sending out an email with all of Dermot's details, as well as what his business specializes in, which is helping you manage your remote teams and the offers he has available. I will be shooting all of those through to you with an email. In an email rather, with the replay link. So again, thank you so much, Dermot. I guess for me, listening to you then, and sort of in the last week, I've been reading a lot around, this pertinent issue of burnout. And I think for so many of us, and especially for myself, I work as a mindfulness practitioner in this space. What I see is a lot of organizations paying a lot of lip service to this, or really treating what I believe to be symptoms of a greater issue. And what I really loved around your presentation is that we really got to see, the guts of it, right? Like the pillars, the root cause of what some of this is coming from. So, we can't be expecting employees to happily work from home if we're adding, administrative tasks to them. And then we're adding the fact that they've probably got kids at home and all the other chaos that's happening. And then we're putting productivity monitors on them, which has actually been my experience in the past, like a timer on my computer to make sure that basically it monitors to my screen when that was on. And in my experience, that basically just was anxiety inducing for the entire period. So I think that for me was the most valuable takeaway, is that if we're truly to address things like employee burnout, well-being, mental health, we actually have to not try and replicate the office setting online, but genuinely shift and, I guess, as you mentioned, upend in a way our expectation of what work looks like to actually find more effective ways of doing it. And it is such an exciting time to be in business. Agreed, for many of us, there's a lot of work to do, and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's not going to be easy, but we have such an amazing opportunity right now to genuinely drive this, what I call human revolution, in this new way of doing business. We can give people flexibility. Imagine what that's going to do for mothers in the workforce and, people with mental health issues, long-term mental health issues, giving them the flexibility to take downtime and flexi time where required. And it's such an amazing opportunity that we're facing right now. But I think that for me was the biggest key takeaway, that these pillars really, we can't start at addressing the symptoms. We can't be telling employees, take a walk in nature and do a meditation, but expecting them to do 10 hours of work and apply to 500 Slack messages until 12 o'clock at night. It's just, we can't have it all. There has to be a fundamental shift in our expectation of what work truly looks like. So that for me was the biggest takeaway, Dermot. A fantastic session. And I do have a few questions coming through here. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to invite Jim on. He asked a great question earlier around helping employees put some structure around those that perhaps don't do as well in that setting. So I'll invite Jim on and he can ask his question directly.
Oh,
Sure.
thanks,
Hi,
Alexis. Hi. So I think, well, just framing the question. So I've managed a remote team before when they've been in an office and there's been, the normal office structure and local managers. That's relative. I mean, it's an extra effort, but not quite what we're facing now. I think with the way that we're working now, with people working from home, that it's more challenging around some people aren't coping with the lack of structure as well. And also I've noticed, like with recent recruits, just building the team dynamics is more challenging when you're not seeing each other and you're not going for coffee and you're not doing those incidental interactions that you do when you're in person. It's a lot more challenging when you're doing everything remotely. So sorry, that's a long-winded way of saying that I think that it's still quite challenging and that not everybody thrives in a work from home environment. And I'm just wondering if you got any thoughts about how you help people who aren't naturally self-disciplined in structuring their day and just probably coping with the lack of structure. Okay,
well, I think the first thing is to say, you're right, everybody's completely different. And the second thing is to say that I totally 100% disagree, 110% disagree with having any sort of monitors on people. I think that's...
Oh yeah, that's not what we're
so yeah, I know you're not advocating it, but poor old Alexis had it in the past. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. When it comes to new recruits, yeah, I get that. It's very hard to onboard people into your culture if you're going to be fully remote. Now, if you're going to be fully remote, and obviously every country and organization is going to be different, so I have to sort of talk generically here, right? But there may be opportunities if you are going to work in a hybrid manner, right? And you are going to have people coming into the office every now and then there is no harm in saying, look, on Friday the 15th of January, right, we'd like everybody to turn up and we'd like to get everybody, all the new starters in and bring them into the fold and have a drink with them and have coffee with them and have a laugh with them or whatever it is, and get everybody introduced to people in a physical format. So I think those sorts of things can certainly still happen. They can even happen on a micro scale, whereby if you take, we'll say, London as an example, and you say your offices are in central London and you've got people dotted all around the circle of London, then you can say, do you know what, team A, you've got 3 people live on the left and 2 people live on the right. Why don't you guys meet up and maybe in the middle or in the north or something like that, and just go to somewhere like Ealing, right? And here's 50 quid, right? Go and sit in a bar or go and sit somewhere for a day, get your Wi-Fi up and running and have as much coffee as you like and bond yourselves together. So there are certainly ways of doing it like that in a physical way. In terms of doing it, if they're fully and purely remote, a little bit more difficult, but that's what they've also signed, that's what they've also signed up for, right? So they should be expecting that.
Well,
right? And
sorry, just to interrupt you there. In Sydney, we've been locked down. So we did think that we're kind of in between lockdowns now. We had a lockdown. We had a brief period where we'd get to the office, and we just got to the point where we was coming regularly 1 day a week. And that's when I hired a couple of new team members, using my own example. And then before they kind of really fully bonded with the whole team and had built themselves a presence in the larger team as well, there we were locked down again, and we were all work from home. So ultimately do plan to go back at least 1 day a week just to help that scenario. But in the meantime,
in the meantime, I think you've got to work with what you've got. All right, there's not a lot you can do to change that. I can only give you a little bit of, we learn from history. If we're anything to go by in the UK, you will probably come back out, and you probably will get to a stage whereby people will be able to go back in and out as you decide or as they decide. But I'm not saying that that's perfect either, because I've got a funny feeling that's going to change even here again. So keep an eye on what's happening over here if you're looking for a benchmark. But things like all those things that we have been doing, like coffee and lunch breaks, but just making them a little bit more interesting. So for example, salad lunch, salad Friday, right? So you can frame that around about well-being and those sorts of things as well. I haven't been able to get into all that level of detail here today, but we talk a lot about Salad Friday, right? And so why don't we all try to be a little bit more conscious about what we're eating, all right? And let's have a salad, and let's all do it together at 1 o'clock, and let's do what are we thinking? Oh my God, it's amazing! Yours is great. Yours is terrible. Look at the state of yours. Yours is a pizza. What are you doing, right? So this is the sort of stuff that we need to do, right? And if we can do those sorts of things online, right, it becomes a little bit more natural. And remember, and you'll know this, right? There are companies that have got amazing cultures that are being 100% online forever. So if you take Zapier as an example, they've got 230 odd people. They operate in 23 countries. They've got an office the size of this room in San Francisco, and they've never met each other. And yet they're a massively successful company. So it can be done.
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. I'm not sure about making friends with salad. I think there's something against that, but I like your idea.
Yeah, it's a principle. Thank you.
You can aim for veggies instead, Jim.
Indeed.
No, thank you for that question, Jim, and thank you, Dermot. And actually, it's interesting, that question, because I've worked now remotely for 2 full years for myself as well. And in various circumstances, I both contract and subcontract for long periods of time to different companies. And so I really do understand, I'm naturally an extrovert. So I really do understand that feeling of, really wanting to feel connected to the people I work with. And I have actually experienced a few kind of funny things that those organizations have done, such as like online trivia, and just, it seems like silly things, but actually when you are even through the online space are able to get together and have a laugh and things like that, I personally have felt like that has gone leaps and bounds for me to just feel that human connectedness to other people. And I'm actually based just in the New South Wales border. So for those of you who don't know Australia, Queensland and New South Wales, I'm an hour from the border, but I'm technically locked out of that state, and the bulk of my clients are in Brisbane. So for the last year and a half, I've had one in-person client meeting in that time. So all of my meetings with those guys have been online as well. And yeah, it's just trying to get as much of that connection as you can, even through the screen. And I really feel personally allowing that kind of personality to come through. And sometimes it's those silly events that we have as a team that actually make all the difference. So that's just my 2 cents for what it's worth on my
you learn more about people at those sorts of events than you do having a structured meeting with them. You really feel, are they happy or are they not?
Yeah.
And they're one of the key metrics is, how happy your people are.
Agreed. And now we have another fantastic question that I'll move us along to. And it's something that I've heard this question asked as well in the past. And I guess for organizations that are between the two, some of us are hybrid, some of us are remote, how do we ensure inclusion in the instances where perhaps some are at the office and some are working online? And I guess it can sometimes feel like the forgotten team member if you're the one person. And again, that's been my experience in some instances. I'm the one person at a client meeting who's not there in person. So quite often, it's difficult to ask a question to the head on the computer screen or whatever the case is. So do you have any tips on that, Dermot, how we might be able to sort of...
Yeah, very simple. We covered it in a slide. We actually covered probably in probably half of a slide in our training. And we say that if you feel like you end up feeling disconnected is what you're actually saying. And when you become disconnected, you eventually, over a period of time, you will leave the organization. That's the first thing. The second thing is we just say to people, you need to make sure that you include everybody who's relevant in a meeting, right? So if you're relevant in that meeting and you should be there, you should be asked to come to that meeting in whatever format that is, whether you're on screen or you happen to be in an office. And that's the end of it. There's no sort of, oh, I'm really busy, and by the time I get her, I'm sure she's probably not even going to be there. She's probably walking her dog, or she's going to be doing this, or well, it doesn't matter, right? You've got to make sure that everybody is included in those meetings all of the time, and it is everybody's responsibility. So we actually say to people, we say in our staff training, we say, if somebody's missing, shout it out. Say, where's Mary? Is everybody here today? Mary's not here yet, right? Can we just make sure we get Mary, and make sure that your boss is actually aware of that? So nobody gets left out for no reason, because not only will Mary begin to catastrophize the reasons that she's been left out, she's never going to say, oh God, that's a bullet dodged, or I didn't have to go to that meeting. What she's going to say is, I wonder why I wasn't asked, right? That's the first thing, right? And the second thing is, you've also lost the contribution from Mary. right? Because she's going to be a valued member of that team. And you as a manager, you've now lost what she was going to say in the first place. So 2 reasons to make sure you do it. Very simple. You just don't do it. You make sure you take the time to include everybody in your meetings all the time.
And I guess, you know, really that rings true for in-person meetings as well, you know, allowing every voice to be heard in the room. And Donald's raised a great point here in the chat. He said you could try that nobody speaks again until everyone's spoken. And that's probably a great idea to do a bit of a roundtable there as well. And Jim, I can see you've got your hand raised there. Do you want to jump in and throw anything into the mix?
Yeah, thanks. I came across a really cool technique where, you know, and this is not just about working from home, this is the remote teams and things like that, where the people who are in the room, they get to advocate for somebody who's not in the room, because it's always a challenge with the being remote to actually keep track of who's speaking, who's about to speak. So by having somebody there who's basically your proxy, so that they message you and say, hey, I want to say something, and then they interrupt so that you get a chance to speak. It makes it that mechanism of getting a chance to speak a lot easier.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, and it's just a little bit of, you know, a bit of online, offline via your phone.
Yeah,
connecting all these people together. Yeah, why not? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's loads of little solutions that people should be able to come up with.
Absolutely. That's great, Jim. Thank you for that. And now I will just keep moving us to the next question. And we have a question here from Kelly, and it's very interesting that you bring this up, Kelly, because I've been reading some research around this recently as well. And that is, now that we're moving to this hybrid model, what are some of the tips that we might have around overcoming people's resistance to the return to office, and how might we make that more attractive? And just before I pass over to Dermot, one thing that I would urge you to be very aware of here, especially to the leaders in the room, and Dermot has already touched on this earlier, is that we have different motivations at work, and we have different motivations around what we feel is important to do in the office and what we feel is important to do online. And some of the research that I was reading just recently, and for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you can actually find a post on this a little way back, is that employers and employees view the purpose of the office very differently. So you as a team really need to tap into understanding what your employees feel the office is important for. Perhaps it's things like collaboration, idea generation, and good old chit chat. However, they might feel like they do their most productive work at home, where I'm very confident the research would suggest that employers want their employees at work because they can monitor their productivity. So tapping into some of those preferences, some of those motivations is really critical here. And Kelly, that might be a very important thing to consider when we talk about this idea of making the workplace more attractive. Well, what is it that draws people to want to be in a workplace in the first place? Now, that's my 2 cents on the research I've been reading recently, but I'll throw over to you, Dermot, because I'm sure you
well, you know what, you're pretty much saying what I'm saying, right? Exactly the same thing. Lots of different drivers and lots of different fears. You know, there are going to be people, we talk about introverts and ambiverts and extroverts. There's going to be people out there who are concerned about getting on a train or getting in a car where people are walking down the street in a very busy environment, getting into an office, which is very, very busy. And they're going to be concerned for a whole host of other reasons. It could be their health. It could be the health of a parent. It could be the health of a child. So you've got all these things that are going on, right? And you as a manager, you're never going to know everything about every single person, that, you know, all those layers that are influencing them. So what do I say to people? I say, you ask the question. You ask them. You find out what people's drivers are. You ask them and you say, you know, what do you want to do and why do you want to do it? And if Mary says, I want to work from home because it's great for me and it does all these things, yada, 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 and I don't have to go to the office, then that's Mary into that box there. And Peter, he's working in a shared house, right? And Peter's got 5 people in the shared house. And where is he working now? He's working on his bed, right? He never signed up for this. He didn't want that to happen. He wants to be able to go to an office and meet people. He's young. He's 25 years old. That's what he wants to do, right? So you've got to take all those into consideration and say, right, okay, having deduced everything, worked it all out. I can't help everybody. I can't please everybody, but this is where I think we should do it. And we're going to try it out for 3 months. And then we'll come back and we'll see how that works. And then people can come back. And if you've got any major issues in that 3 months, come and see me personally. That's what I would do.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Dermot. And I guess another thing while I was listening to you speak there as well around that, there's obviously our work preferences, the environments we prefer to work in. But I guess another question that I would really ask leaders to check in with themselves is, why do you feel the need for people to return to the office? If it isn't about things like collaboration and, you know, some of those like one-to-one, you know, the connectedness, why are we needing our staff to return to work? And if these are issues around productivity, maybe let's tap into that. You know, is psychological safety and trust really at the foundation of our business here, or is that something we maybe need to take a step back and have a look at? So again,
Absolutely.
the context is completely different. Obviously, some organizations will need people like customer service administrators, all those kinds of things that have necessities in person. But yeah, there's a lot of questions based on your industry, but there's those pillars, as Dermot has mentioned, really do frame up for us that opportunity to take a step back and say, okay, well, why do we feel this is necessary for our organization?
Alexa, if I can just jump in there, I think it's very, very important because, you know, I'm not a radical person by any stretch of imagination, right? But, right, what's happened in the last 18 months, the boot is suddenly on the other foot, right? And for the first time, employees have got the opportunity to turn around and say, this is what I want to do, right? And this is how I want to work. This is what I want my life to look like when I work between 9 and 5 on a Monday to Friday. And you need to listen, because I guarantee you that if you're not listening, your competitors are listening. And if your competitors are listening, I know where I'd end up working. Right, 44% of people in a recent survey in the UK in September said that they were thinking of leaving the next 6 months. And one of the drivers for that was because they don't have a proper hybrid policy in place. That's a fact, right? And I know that, and this applies to, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? And, you know, I've always thought that, you know, over the years that my people were really loyal and they'd, you know, they'd die for me and all that sort of stuff. It isn't always the way. Right. I was always surprised when people would have left an organization that I was running or that I owned or whatever it is. I always was really surprised. And sometimes you miss the very obvious things because you believe that you're right and you're not always right. It's a horrible thing to say to somebody, but you're not always right. And sometimes you got to ask them. You know, we advocate doing surveys, right? And anonymous surveys, and we're all surveyed out. And I get that, right? I'm not talking about a survey saying, do you want a chair? Do you want to, you know, all that sort of stuff? Would you like to work from home? I'm not interested in that. They've all started making those decisions. You now need to start asking questions, like really hard questions, like, are you being micromanaged by your manager? If so, have you tried to resolve it? No. Does that now leading you to think about leaving? They're the sorts of questions you need to start asking, as opposed to saying, I, as the boss, love going into the office, love driving in and driving through town in the morning when it's nice and quiet. There you go.
Yeah, and I guess that yeah, everyone's preferences are different, and I think it's that consideration that we do need to start having some of those what may feel like uncomfortable conversations, because we're not going to actually, you know, get the depth of understanding we need to understand how, you know, where we're at in terms of how effective our rollout of this style of work has been and where change is still necessary. So as leaders, we do really need to dig deep and start becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable in a lot of these settings as well. So
exactly.
Great insights there. And I'm getting some great insights through on the chat as well, guys. And one, I just want to raise something that someone mentioned earlier around this concept of sort of engaging, especially when we haven't been able to have that in office time. Someone mentioned a buddy system would be a really great way of doing that as well. Perhaps, I'm not sure in what context, if it's a check-in thing or if it's someone that you meet with regularly to work with, so you at least have that one-to-one connection. But again, what works for you might, you know, that might be a fantastic option. So I'm just also reading through this. If anyone has any more questions that they'd like to pop into the chat as well for Dermot right now, I'm getting amazing, you know, insights from all of your individual experiences. But if you do have any burning questions, please throw them in. Now's the time. Yeah, and Sally, that's a great insight. Honest answers to those hard questions will hinge on psychological safety. And you're so right. And that's really going to give us that understanding of whether or not we've built real trust, or if we've got that pseudo trust where people are telling us what they feel or what they think we need to hear. And that's, you know, as we all know, it doesn't actually get us anywhere. And as an employee, you know, I've worked for organizations where there's been an absence of psychological trust, and obviously a different organization to the one that was monitoring me. That's a whole nother level. And I was actually in the public sector, where they have to have these sorts of metrics on productivity of employees. Still awful. But you know, as well as an employee on the receiving end of that, how that makes you feel. And so I think sometimes as leaders, we sometimes shift when we go from being an employee to actually managing other people. We sort of shift our thinking and what's expected of us. And it can be as simple as like, well, how would this feel if the boot was on the other foot? And so if you know what it feels like to be in an organization with the absence of psychological safety and trust, it's pretty self-explanatory in a lot of ways. I think we can overcomplicate this in some instances as well. Now I'm just reading through here. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to catch up.
Let me just jump in there, right? Just while you're looking,
Please,
right? Because
yeah.
somebody mentioned psychological safety, very, very important. Totally agree. And depending on the size of your organization, if you only got 2 or 3 people, this is impossible. But if you've got a decent amount of people, doing those surveys in an anonymous format, right? A genuinely anonymous format, and using maybe even an outside firm to do it, it means that people can say what they want to say. And my God, then you get some real answers. Then you go, what? 60% of my people are thinking of leaving. Oh my God, I need to start doing this. I need to get this sorted out immediately. Right? And then you can start to drill down then afterwards and start working with people on an individual basis. And then your psychological safety comes into play, because people will leave. And you know what? Even when people leave, they leave for a whole host of reasons, as we know. But then, right, then you do an exit interview if you even bother with that. And that's also rubbish, because, people never tell you the truth, right? So, there's so much of this thing that we've been going on with for so many years. Right now, let's start working this properly and truthfully as human beings.
Yeah, I agree, Dermot. It's interesting, this concept of exit interviews, because quite often employees have been so checked out and so disengaged for such a long period of time. They just don't care, and they're not going to give you the adequate feedback that you would be able to get if they were on that verge of disengagement as well. And we know that when an employee becomes disengaged, it's just a plethora of other issues within the organization. So this idea of actually kind of checking in before it gets to that point is critical, not only to their turnover intentions, but also the effect that they're going to have on the productivity and the culture for the rest of your employees as well. Because whether or not they want to be, they end up being a bad apple when they become jaded and disengaged in that job. So it's really, really critical that we just rip that band-aid off and ask the hard questions, because you're just not doing yourself any favors by not doing it.
Indeed.
And Dagmara's thrown some awesome ideas in here as well around, I guess, checking in for mental health and various well-being things as well. And that is building time for a check-in into your connecting conversations. And that's really critical. And that's obviously something that we can overlook, but that, that chit-chat, that check-in, that mental health conversation, making that, like, genuinely systemizing that into your meetings, not just talking about it or doing your tick a box one-off mental health meeting in a year. As Dermot mentioned, like really building this into the foundation of our meetings and what we value as an organization is really critical here. Regular team meetings to keep consistent base. That's great as well. Really, really good issues there. And actually something that I would like to ask Dermot around that is, again, I've been reading a lot of research lately around this idea of work about work and how much time we may be wasting now that we have transitioned to this remote or hybrid model, and how much kind of additional administration that may have created for employees. Do you have any suggestions for us or insights for us around how we can stop wasting time in working about work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's definitely a lot of time spent working about work, and I think there's a lot of time also spent doing things that don't necessarily need to be done. We're advocating, or will be advocating going forward. I don't want to frighten anybody here, but we will be advocating going forward a 4-day week, right? And we're going to start thinking about those sorts of things next year, because I saw a survey, and I don't have the stats on this. Somebody has asked me, but I think it was a guy who was in Australia. It might have been an English guy in Australia, if you can research that, who said that in the UK in particular, that people were, this is pre-pandemic, that people were only productive for about 2.5 hours a day. Now, you can't expect people to go bang, 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 bang all day long, right? And I get that, right? But that's still a lot. There's still a lot of not working hours out of those 8 hours. So there's opportunities in here for us to become better at what we do. But I think the first thing for us to do is just to become happier at what we do, right? And then let's move on to becoming better at what we do, right? So I think if we try and do all this in one go, if we're KPMG or one of the big four, one of those sort of guys, that's great. They've got hundreds of people doing strategies and all that sort of stuff. And, you become a rigid box, right? But we're not boxes. We're not sort of pegs and holes and that sort of stuff. We're human beings. So make me happy first, right? Make me really enjoy. Let me go to the gym today, see my mum today, whatever it is. And then say, well, let's see how we can be more productive. Let's stop this thing about doing X, Y, Z. Why don't we just cut that out? What do you think? Yeah, I don't like doing it anyway. Great, let's do that. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Dermot. And something that's really interesting in my personal experience, and this is obviously very anecdotal here, guys, but I worked for a decade in organizations, with an 8-hour workday, and I would get 8 hours worth of work done in an 8-hour workday. When I started working for myself, I realized how much work you could get done in an 8-hour workday when you were paying yourself, you know. And I love surfing. So for me, I don't clock on until 10 a.m. in the morning. I surf in the morning, I get in, I smash my work because I know I value my time. So the flexi working and the flexible working, I think will actually motivate people in and of itself to become more productive with their time. When you give them ownership for their time, they're going to use it way more wisely. When you're telling them to sit in an office for 8 hours a day because they get paid for 8 hours a day, not for their outputs, it's kind of killing the productivity in its own sense like that. So I guess that's one factor of it. And I think the other thing that I heard you mention as well is this idea of, you know, just being conscious of how much time we are taking up around things that aren't really necessary. You know, like let's, you know, try and cut down on that. And if we do move to something like a 4-hour work week, we really do have to cut a lot of fluff to make that happen. 4-hour work week. Sorry,
that's my dream.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Alexis, when you mentioned work about work earlier, research, have you were talking about the report from Asana?
Yeah.
Or something else?
That's right. Okay. The report from Asana. That's right. And they mentioned that, you know, I guess the administrative time, well, I call it administrative time, but this work about work, the meetings about doing the things, had caused, I think their statistic was 26% of the workforce to have missed deadlines in that 2021 or 2020 year that they were surveying, which I'm not really sure how they collect that data, but if you take it at face value, it feels like that would have been billions of dollars of lost money in time.
Absolutely. I'm just reading it, I cannot share because I don't have the permissions, but I'm looking at it at the moment. They're talking about 60% of the time people are investing in work about work. Only 26% of skilled work and 14% on strategy.
Yeah.
So that's a really big problem here.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It's a fabulous opportunity, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to turn everybody into a robot so that they're productive 8 hours a day. Otherwise, we might as well just employ a robot. But people can definitely be better. But right now, I think that we've got to make sure we get them happy first, because they've gone through so much in the last 18 months. And if that's something we decide to do next year, that's a great time to start doing it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, again, this idea of creating flexibility for them, I think in and of itself will start driving productivity, because we're allowing people to work in a way that feels productive to them, and removing outside of this box, that is the 8-hour work day and the 5-day work week, and what we believe to be productive, because it's been the structure we've worked in for so long, but it needn't be the case. And there are so many of us who, you know, work remotely and you know, manage lives, and frankly, I can again say anecdotally, my life has become infinitely more enjoyable now that I'm not sitting in an office all day and not commuting, and you know, able to do small things like my laundry and cook myself a healthy lunch without having to think of all those extra things in advance. So for me, that brings me joy. It brings me happiness. I get to see my partner for lunch and all those small things that I wouldn't get to do in the office. So you're so right. There's such a critical human element to this that we so often overlook, that you know, is really, really important consideration here. Fantastic.
Good
well
stuff.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for attending this evening. Dermot, thank you so much for giving us your time, your wisdom, your experiences. Again, for those of you who would like to know more about Dermot and his work, I will be sending out an email on Friday with the replay and all of his information around how you can get in contact with him. He is also a connection of mine on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to him, connect with him on LinkedIn, and go about it that way as well. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. It's been a fantastic session, and I hope that the end of 2021 and 2022 is a much more enjoyable year for all of us in business, and we start to recalibrate and get excited about this opportunity we have. We get to create this new normal, guys. Like, what a time to be alive, you know? It's a fantastic opportunity. And I'm so fired up, and I'm so fired up to help all of you, you know, transition to that as well. And businesses like Dermot's are just going leaps and bounds in helping us do this. So please do reach out to the professionals in this space. And now's our time. We can truly create a better business environment for humans, guys. So thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, guys.
We'll talk again.